Which then takes us on to our closing panel, which Mike will moderate, and if I can ask the panelists to come forward, about the anatomy of a life science leader. And once the panel's complete, if you could stay with us, because then we'll announce the BioNewsRound Award winner. And then I promise I won't stand between you and drinks much long after that. So just to forewarn you what's coming up. Mike.
Great. So how long have you got, seeing as everybody else has run over?
Well, so I suppose you could compress it a bit, you know.
Okay. Right, so you still want to finish at 10 to 5?
5 to would be good.
Okay, great.
Actually, if you finish by 5 by that clock, that's faster than mine.
Okay, that's good. I didn't even know there was a clock there.
Yeah,
So.
okay. If you
So
finish by
that's
5
useful.
on that one, mine will be letting you wrap up.
Okay. Bit of housekeeping now. So yeah, it's actually, you know, given the fact that, you know, this panel, do we not have a slide for the panel? Oh. Thank you, Tony. Anatomy of a life science leader. It's a pity actually that we don't have any sort of self-confessed Tories, because of course, you know, they actually have had that opportunity to sort of, you know, appraise people with leadership skills, and they've had quite a lot of practice this year. Still not sure whether they've actually got it right yet, but so this is Anatomy of a Life Science Leader. Earlier in this year, you may have sort of seen it. It was a kind of like, almost like a teaser. Tony, I think, posted on LinkedIn. Oh, you know, what do you sort of think are the sort of the qualities of a leader in the life sciences companies? And the sort of the messages that came out, it was all about, you know, being authentic, you know, whatever that actually means, so it's sort of whether you can be artificial, curious, visionary or creative, inclusive, adaptable. So those were the sort of some of the key themes. I'm not sure if I missed, but others that also, you know, sort of I was thinking about is like, you know, ethical. But if you remember my slides earlier today, some leaders have clearly shown that they're not ethical. Communicative, motivational, decisive, constructively critical, or empathic. Again, that'll be an interesting one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask my panelists first to introduce themselves and give a brief description of actually what exposure they've actually had to leadership training. Okay, so I'll tell you what, why don't we start with you, Barry?
Right. Hi everyone, I am the Chief Strategy Officer of CPL Group, which is a European talent solutions and recruitment business. And I also head up our advisory group, which is called the Future Work Institute. So we're actually actively working on what the future of leadership is, what it needs to be, and quite frankly, a lot of crap that's out there that we all have to read about when we talk about leadership as well. So hopefully might simplify it a little bit today. So.
No, that sounds like we're going to get some interesting insights.
So I'm Lisa Page. I'm a partner in a law firm, Pennington Matthews Cooper. But on my career, I started out as a scientist and then went on to work in the clinical trials space, first for a pharmaceutical company and then for IQVIA. And my experience of leadership there was basically managing multinational clinical trial projects. I think my biggest project was about 25 countries. And that was phase 3 registration studies, you can imagine. And then obviously, in my role as a partner, you take a leadership role within a team in a law firm.
Hi, I'm Angie Miller. I'm a senior business manager at LifeArc. We're a healthcare charity that helps academic-derived innovation get to the patient. My exposure to leadership is really through large initiatives and the fact that I lead two fellowship programs for scientists who want to become technology transfer professionals. Some of my fellows were there. I've never had any training in leadership. So it's this whole nurture, nature. I'm quite interested to hear what people have, their views on it.
Yeah. Lovely to meet everybody. So Suzanne Holden, I'm Vice President of an organisation called Thermo Fisher Scientific. So we're supporting a lot of scientists around the world. I have worked for the company for about 20 years. Most of my work on a day-to-day basis is working across a very large UK network of around 8,000 colleagues in the company. So I spend a lot of my time networking and influencing without any authority. I also have the pleasure of leading a very small team of executives who are supporting our key customers globally. So I kind of come to it from both camps, but similar to yourself, very little formal training. I think you learn on the job and you look at people that you admire from a distance and really try and emulate how they're leading.
Yeah, so actually the interesting stuff, that idea of sort of like you're managing where you actually don't have any sort of like direct report or sort of absolute, you're having to influence or persuade
Yeah.
or encourage. I think we you know, hopefully we can sort of delve into that, because I think that's probably sort of you know, a key skill.
Yeah.
But to come to the idea of sort of looking at people you admire, what I'd like you to do is sort of tell us, you know, who, out of everything, not just in the life sciences space, but actually someone that you have seen that actually you admire as a leader, and you know, what was the key quality that they sort of demonstrated that actually, that they have in abundance. So, why don't we keep you, Suzanne?
Yeah, so I'm going to stay clear of the football example, because I'm sure everyone's going to try and bring up the football example. But I'll stay within the industry, and there's a company called Mode RNA, or most people know it as Moderna. I would say they have set a really good example of an organisation that has scaled very quickly and had to scale very quickly to serve a global pandemic. And I think there isn't really a single person in that organisation, but our company works quite closely with their leadership team, and I'd say it's the leadership team themselves that are what I would look to as successful, because I think they've had to really work through a lot of challenges, and they've done it as effectively as they can do. They've made some very bold decisions, but they've done that as a unified team. So maybe you can look at the chief executive and the board above the team, but I think really it's the team in that company that have really performed really well and delivered on something that everybody needed at one point in their life.
So the skill is to kind of like focus and unify.
Yeah, and I think focus, unify, scale, and essentially set a vision and understand there was a timeline to that vision. And often organisations don't have such a defined timeline of getting to a goal. That was probably one of the very few examples where you've seen there's an absolute critical need to get to a point, and I think having that vision and driving the leadership team towards that from the chief executive and beyond was kind of what I would admire, I think.
Angie?
Yeah, when I'm thinking back, I'm thinking individuals who I have seen who, without really thinking, impassioned me, and I could see that they were leading others. And when I think back, it's one of my very dear colleagues who's not here any longer, unfortunately, but she was a director in technology transfer as well. So it is where, for her, it was her passion. The passion that she had for the work, for the science that she did, the fact that she was a black woman within technology transfer who had to work her way up, and there aren't very many of us, but also the fact that she mentored without realizing that she was mentoring others, and because she was very hands-on, she had done everything. It really is where she understood what it was like for someone who was more junior than herself and would provide guidance and explain why decisions had to be made. So I think it was someone who was fighting to ensure that, others could follow in her pathway, but also the sector would be much better and stronger.
Right. Okay. So passion was obviously a sort of a key
passion,
attribute.
and I think also because she was going against the grain. It's really where diversity is a big thing for me. Anyone who knows me knows that. But it was really where it's not a diverse sector. But the thing is, this is someone who was trying to level the playing field for women, but also the underrepresented within the sector. And it's really where encouraging and standing as a role model. So it was really where naturally she did that because she was a very passionate person. And it was just her personality. It wasn't something that was an act that she was putting on. It was just that this is a dynamic person, and it just meant that she was quite affectionate and really just growing anyone around her.
Yes.
So she was a natural leader.
So you mentioned about sort of nature nurture.
Exactly. I'm coming back to that.
I'm sort of thinking like charisma.
Yep.
Well, can you sort of like train yourself
But
to be charismatic?
it's just, when someone is, it's coming from the heart, they're impassioned, they believe what they're doing, it really is compelling, when you're there and you see it. But also when you see someone execute day in, day out, and it's in everything they do. It's not where it's hot, cold. It's really where it's there all the time. So, this is a fair person, very honest, very open, very direct. So you knew where you were with this individual. So for me, it was really where, that's how I like it. You know, what you see is what you get.
Right. Lisa.
So my, because I thought quite a lot about this, you know, who I would say was a leader that I admired, and I came back to an experience that I probably had quite early on in my career as well, and I think that's when you sort of look to people and think, do you know what, I'd like to be someone like that. And this was a clinical trial project manager for Pfizer, actually. I worked on the registration studies for elatriptan, which was their migraine drug. So this was a big sort of registration program. I was project manager for Quintiles, and we had, I can't remember how many countries we worked in. We had our team, Pfizer had their team, and he managed to bring both those disparate teams together. You know, I didn't feel like I was the CRO delivering. I felt like we were part of this big team that was delivering this overall trial. He was very good at giving, so it was a program and there were basically various different trials within it. He was very good at giving the project managers that work with him space to basically, you know, have good ideas, but he was very supportive. And it was that clarity of vision. I mean, it sounds really stupid, but we had this thing, we were the great ship elatriptan. I mean, it was all kind of, I think his background was in the military at some point, so it was all like sailing analogies, and is the ship going on? And he used to send these really funny emails with all these sailing analogies, and I used to laugh at them, but that really sort of, everybody knew where we were going and what we were trying to do, and that for me just made it, I was like, do you know what? When I get to that stage, I want to do that. I want everybody on my team to know where I'm going and what's important, and also that the ship can rock, but you just work together to steady it. So that was the one for me. Guy called Neville Jackson, by the way, in case anyone knows him. He was great.
Great, so we actually got a name there.
There you go.
So at the moment, he is like the most inspirational leader we have. so Barry.
Actually, I'm going to pick my current CEO, who I work very closely with, Lorna Khan, because I think what's interesting there is that as an organisation over the last few years, we've internationalised a lot. And you mentioned diversity, Angie, and you know, it's become almost overnight a multicultural, very diverse organisation. And I think, you know, I think Lisa, you mentioned it too, consistency of vision, you know, and consistently reinforcing that is one of the big things of her leadership style. And secondly is, you know, what I would call very visible involvement, you know, and very formal involvement to kind of capture multiple voices would be the two things I would kind of call out from her style, you know, in terms of her as a leader, those two elements within that.
So that sort of, you're calling out, is that means sort of, you know, sort of the inclusivity, you actually feel that your voice is being heard?
I mean, I think it's one of the things actually I know we'll talk more about the nature and nurture thing. It's one of the things from our own research is this idea of explicitness, you know, and people don't talk about explicitness when it comes to leadership. But be very explicit about what you mean. You mentioned authenticity, you know, and straight away you go, what the hell is he talking about? You know, look, let's be really honest, you know. But being explicit is to say, well, what that actually means within our organisation, what that means to you. That's different to just kind of, let's throw out some buzzwords, you know. Because I was on the train this morning, I was kind of going, open the Harvard Business Review here, open up some research, you know, and throw out the, you know, and that's often what these discussions become. So I think that idea of, absolutely, Angie. So I think explicitness is really important. And being very, the ability to kind of make things explicit, you know. I think that's
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm a subscriber to the Harvard Business Review.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of HBR. I've seen lots and lots of articles on leadership, and I still haven't got a clue. Because it just seems to be also contradictory. I mean, that's the reason why
I'm going to put a disclaimer, you know, I do also like the Harvard Business Review.
So today's discussion, though, is actually, it's about, okay, the anatomy of a life science leader. And I'm just sort of, you know, thinking, are there, you know, when it comes to, you know, a life science company's leader, what do we think the most important skills that they would need? I mean, is it technical skills, and also how, because we've got within the life sciences sector, we have, you know, little startups all the way through. We've got all the sort of, you know, sort of CROs, CDMOs, all the people in the different development timelines, we've got biotech companies that are growing, and then we've got specialty pharma and then big pharma. So again, so what are the sort of the differences? So if I come to you, Suzanne, because you work in a relatively big company that keeps acquiring, so there must be some different skills involved in there. So when you sort of look at sort of the life sciences, and you compare what you've got with, say, for example, what you saw at Moderna, what do you sort of see as working, and more to the point, what doesn't work?
I think, you've got to be a good communicator. I think clearly you can't really work in any organisation, any industry without articulating clear communication. But I think you've also got to be able to listen very clearly. And with an organisation like the size of ours, there's an awful lot you learn from the team around you, but you have to be open to truly listening and understanding. And I think as a leader, you have to take the time with the team to really understand the pain points and then have compassion to work with them through those pain points. And I think our organisation has set a really good culture for that I think it's always been there. I think through COVID, it really exposed itself that we truly had a culture, because we're very divisionally focused, and in some cases we can be quite siloed. But when the organisation needs to come together, the culture really came forward, and everyone became part of one organisation. But I think everyone really had to listen to one another more than we ever did before, and then really communicate what we were understanding to apply what we wanted to try and do to be successful. And I think any large organisation needs to do that, but I think really good leaders really take the time to understand what's happening in the heartbeat of their organisations.
So, but how did they sort of do that? What sort of tools would they actually have to be able to, one, ensuring that they're getting genuine messages rather than people just telling them what they think the boss wants to hear?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. And I think, it's very easy when you're in a leadership role to never really set foot out into what is the shop floor and speak to the guys and girls in the operations or the warehousing or distribution, or who are submitting quality processes through. I think you really understand the complexities they're facing when you go out and really spend time with the team. I think all of our leaders do that. Sometimes you feel like in a big organisation you get pulled into a lot of leadership meetings and you're not getting out with the teams, but I think to be successful you have to do that, and you have to spend and invest the time to do that, and our leadership team need to make that something that's rewarded and supported for really kind of getting out and spending that time with the team, because you learn so much.
Yeah. So Angie,
See, I think you touched on a key point. I think there are many leaders, but the thing is, the best leaders, no matter the size of the establishment, they have a mechanism to hear the true voice of those that are within the company. And unfortunately, a lot of the time, there are so many layers. Like sometimes these teams that they have, it's really their own voice that they give in. They're not talking for those that report to them. And I think a true leader sometimes they just need to roll their sleeves up and get down with everyone else, with the plebs. It's really, really understand what's going on, and to really, to feel the heartbeat, they need to get down and dirty. But unfortunately, sometimes, the establishment is so big that they don't do that. Yeah. Or the tiny dip that they have is a snapshot, and it's not really. Yeah. But it's really, I think that's the difficulty when you have like a large establishment. For like smaller, like a lot of the time, because we deal with a lot of academic research, so sometimes these are innovations that are going to be incubated into a company. Unfortunately, the inventor is not necessarily the best leader, and this is where it's a hard lesson, and it's a hard message to give, because some of these qualities, either that they have to learn. Yes, they're great in leading their lab, but the thing is, they're not going to lead this company that's going to take this technology to the patient. And this is, again, it touches on this nature, nurture, whether you can learn from Harvard Business Review or not. But the thing is, it is where, because the passion is really where this is their baby, they've been working on this for 15, 20 years, they're not going to be able to cut the strings to actually take the technology forward.
I think maybe just to add to that as well, when you have truly understood the heartbeat of the organisation, as a leader, I think you always have an expectation that you're going to solve everything. I think the reality is you need to be very open and transparent on things you are going to solve, but probably more importantly, over-communicate the things that you can't resolve, and And I think that becomes more critical sometimes, because then you really get the team's understanding why you're making the decisions that you're making. And I think some leaders don't communicate some of the things that we can't solve for as effectively as the things that we are going to solve.
So is the approach to actually almost give everybody permission to challenge?
Yep.
Right, sort of saying, look, this is
Completely.
allowed?
Yeah. And even up to our CEO, the door's always open, his email's always open, anyone is welcome to send anything to him, and he's a very
Is he
responsive.
receptive to it?
He is, yeah.
Because you get some saying that, but
Yeah,
they really don't
no,
want to
he-
hear.
He
It's
really
like,
is very receptive to it.
yeah,
He's
yes. Just saying.
an impressive character.
So yeah, I wanted to pick up a little bit on what Angie was talking about, because my experience now in the work that I do, I tend to work with those spin-outs and those startups, and I think the skills that a leadership person needs when they are suddenly catapulted from, often as you say, 1 minute I'm leading a lab, next minute, hey, I've got to be the HR person, I've got to speak to these investor people who want to talk to me about, because I need some money and I've got to work out what runway means, and and so a leader in that scenario is a very, very different beast to, I think, somebody who leads a large organisation. They've got to be able to know their limitations, know whether they're the right person to do it. And as you say, sometimes maybe you can get them to be the CSO, not always. Yeah. But, if they can do that, and some people are really good at it, basically going, right, okay, I think I can do this. I can, because they're essentially changing their career. And as from someone who came from a career change and went from like managing these trials to basically being a trainee lawyer, not even knowing how to write a letter, I understand when these CEOs come to me and they go, Lisa, I need an employee. Do I need it? Yes, you do need an employment contract. Yes. Oh, I need some labs. Do I need to talk about it? Yeah, let's talk about leases. And I think it's so I think the leadership that you need at that early stage is a very different model, and I think it's why we often see almost like career startup CEOs, and I think those traits of being able to start with nothing, to come from a large company where this is, we've got this CRM system, this is to literally start with an office and that's it, and to be able to build that company and have that vision and be able to communicate, in my mind, for those sort of early companies, it's a very different skill set, but very important nonetheless.
Yeah, I remember in the early days when people were leaving big firms to sort of go into biotechs, and I sort of remember sort of saying to the CEO, and I said, "So, well, what's it like?" And he says, "I have to make my own coffee." Put the paper in the photocopier.
Absolutely.
So they went on to be very successful. So that's fine.
Yeah, I think it's a brilliant question. I think when we look at leadership, I always think about it through space, time, and context. So you mentioned the size of organisation. A lot of the companies you work with, not just within the life sciences sector, I should say, but in startup mode, actually what's lacking there is not leadership, it's core management and organisational skills. So that's the context bit, right? If you're a startup, oftentimes the ability to organise, get things done quickly, to project manage things very quickly is much more important than necessarily visionary, conceptual type leader. So, when you then look at larger organisations, they have a tendency then to focus more on conceptual skills, where actually there's time to breathe, you have a team underneath. The team underneath are doing a lot of the managing, but you're doing kind of the broader, leadership kind of visionary piece. So I think it's really important that, a lot of the research we've done, whilst it's on leadership, oftentimes it comes back to management, and how strong actually are the managers within that organisation in getting things done, in planning and executing. So, I always like to say the golden mean for me is, for every 10 managers, one leader, right? And that, everybody's a leader, but, in terms of how you play that function, at that particular time is going to be really, really important. And I think that's, I hate to bring management into a leadership discussion, but actually it's really, really important. I've worked with organisations that have many leaders, no managers, and lots of ideas, lots of concepts, nothing gets done, and everybody loses their job. And I've seen organisations that, don't necessarily have visionary leaders, but they have strong management practices, a strong commitment to getting things done. They've been extremely successful. So I think for me, that for me is the context piece, and the time piece. And I think one of the things I've seen, if I don't mind saying this to a life sciences audience, I'm not from a life sciences background, but with life sciences companies I've seen is that often I see that they don't necessarily see leadership skills in the same context as their technical skills. You know, and that's, by the way, similar in the IT industry and in software development, where the king is what I would call the I. You know, it's the deep competency, but actually recognizing that in order to get things done, Suzanne, you mentioned it there, you know, is actually that's a hard skill, and it can be learned and it can be developed over time. But the same way as you can develop your technical skills in the lab or whatever you're doing, that top of the T often gets forgotten about. You know, so I think I always keep saying the hardest stuff is the soft stuff.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So what you're saying is, okay, so yeah, having that sort of like deep technical skill, that's great.
Yeah.
Okay, but in fact, you've probably got other people in the company who've actually got probably more technical skills. But actually, a core, and if it's missing, then it's not going to work. Is actually having that sort of time management, organisational skills, etc. Which, in fact, you could imagine that in a sort of somebody who's been running a lab might not necessarily have that because they've actually had technicians or whatever who actually make sure that everything is already there. Okay, so that's helpful. Coming back to the sort of, with the sort of start on the academics, okay. How much, given the fact that to be a leader, you have to kind of sort of show some sort of charisma or whatever, and therefore ego is important. However, the ego can also be to the detriment. So, good or bad ego?
Bad. Bad. It's like scientists, I'm a scientist myself, but I don't have an ego. But the thing is, it is where, professors, the top professor, trust me, ego is huge, bigger than the man himself. But the thing is, like, when someone is, particularly with the startup, sometimes you've got where very well-known professor, top of their game, but they want to be CEO. They don't want to be CSO. And it's this ego thing where, and then it comes to the technical skills, but also those executive skills that you need to have to be in that CEO position. It's really where the ego tells them that they can do it. They can be both. And unfortunately, that's to their detriment half of the time. This is why, sometimes you hear about people, we don't like talking to VCs because when they come in, they're going to change the team and whatever. It's because, unfortunately, it's the wrong mix. And they won't let go. I think being a strong leader is, we mentioned that you need to understand where the strengths lie and use the individuals around you. It's a team sport to really be successful in leading. It's not where you do everything. You can't fix everything, but you put your trust in others and empower them so that they can help you deliver.
And I think sometimes with the academics, you sometimes see that if I go to pitch events and they give this incredibly scientific pitch, which would probably go down a storm at a scientific conference, and you can just see the VCs going, I don't understand, and you know what I mean? And so sometimes we coach people, it's just like, take it up a level, you know what I mean? And that is a very big part of being a CEO, particularly in a startup. Is that, and so many presentations today have talked about funding, the funding gap. You've got to have the right people going out there talking about that. It's usually the CEO, because that's what they want to see, and it's got to be the right person. Yeah. And that person should be, passionate about the technology, very positive, but it shouldn't really, in most cases, be their baby. Because people might want to sort of change the clothes of it.
You get defensive,
Exactly, they don't like that,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I've yet to meet someone with a really strong ego that can truly empower a team around them. And I think, and there was a great Harvard Business Review I was reading yesterday. It was around the changing leadership role in the economic world we're all in, which is obviously going to be struggling for the next kind of 12 or so months. And one of the things that they were really focusing on was moving closer to a team without suffocating the team. And I think someone that has a really strong ego really struggles to stay close without just really putting a blanket around everybody because they think they can do everything themselves.
I think that's a great point, because I think just to come back to some of your points as well, you're absolutely right. I mean, we see this often in our research, including the life sciences sector, is the inability to translate concepts into meaningful stories. You know, I hear about storytelling all the time, right? But I'm often in rooms like this where you kind of start to fall asleep, you know, because somebody's saying something, what the hell, they probably fall asleep listening to me, but anyway. But I mean, I think that ability to translate it is really, really important. The ego thing is really interesting, and I think there's a difference to me between having a very clearly articulated vision that you can get people going with you versus, you know, being egotistical. So I think leaders who are strong at being able to develop a vision and what that vision means to the people that you're trying to bring along is not ego. That's actually, you know, very, very strong management. I think where ego sometimes creeps in, and I often see this in leaders, is where there are gaps. Lisa, you mentioned there are gaps there, but there's a lack of self-awareness that those gaps are there. And I would say, you know, particularly within some of my experiences within the sector, is that higher level of self-awareness, really understanding who am I, what am I good at? Can I actually listen to somebody tell me what I'm good at or not? It seems like nothing, but I think it would unleash, you know, unleash hell, I think the saying Gladiator, but you know what I mean, unleash, you know, a kind of a meaningful change. So, you know, that to me, self-awareness, when people talk to me about, you know, something that sounds total crap, excuse my language, but being able to sit down and kind of go, this is who I am. And, you know, I think, you know, we've done some work where only 1 out of 10 people are actually fully self-aware. So if you imagine 1 out of 10 of everybody here is really, you know, kind of self-aware, that's pretty interesting. You know, so that's the ego maybe, Suzanne, I don't know. Yeah.
I think just a final point on that, I'm not sure if everyone's read the book that Catherine and Sarah Gilbert wrote called Vaxxers, but there's a great comment in it that Catherine talks about the point where they had to scale production of the vaccine. They didn't really want to let it outside of Oxford's kind of control, and then AstraZeneca come in and they're asking all these questions, and the comment from Kath in the book was, why are they asking all these questions? And she really kind of pushed back on them. It wasn't an ego, but it was she didn't understand why they were asking. 2 weeks into the discussion, she realised, wow, they know an awful lot more about what we need to do and what we're going to face as issues. But she wasn't immediately open to it. It's a fascinating book to read what their mindset was going in. And they were out-and-out leaders at that point in time, but they just didn't know the issues that they were going to be facing because they didn't face them.
So, I mean, somebody mentioned about sport. I think it was Suzanne, you mentioned sport earlier on. I always kind of sort of think that, you know, teams, like team sports, are great in terms of, you know, helping people understand, you know, sort of different roles, etc. And clearly, sometimes you see a leader emerges rather than sort of, I want to be the leader, because everybody wants to be the striker or whatever. So I'm just sort of, you know, sort of thinking, you know, when you sort of like the anatomy of a life science leader, how much is it that they've got some sort of, you know, history of actually demonstrating outside the workspace that they can actually work with others sort of with goals? So, Barry, I mean, with all your research...
Give me that hard question.
Barry got that one.
Well,
I'm
sorry, I just thought
I have to go now,
On the
sorry.
team, he's the right guy. I'm behind Barry.
I'm behind you, Barry. I think it's a brilliant question, and I will bring in a couple of sports analogies here. Some of you might know Johnny Sexton. He's quite a famous Irish rugby player. And you know, he's also quite a well-known European rugby player, I suppose. And I actually spoke to Johnny a number of times in interviewing him, but you know, because you get a lot of people talking about the sports analogy. And interesting enough, he said 2 things to me actually. He said one was the biggest difference that a leader had made to him was actually instilling meaningful values into the team, so that because there's no other measure, you know, outside of all the metrics you get measured on as a rugby player, you know, speed, strength, agility, you know. But once you take that away, what are you left with? Right? Well, it's your adherence to values and how you're kind of adhering to those values as a team. It's how you kind of measure your behaviours or your ability to lead through those values. So values almost have become for those teams, very good Irish team, I should say, is you know, as part of what they are. You know, it's part of how they measure behaviour beyond what I would call the standard stuff. But the second thing he said to me was equally interesting, which was, you know, he's learned as much around being a leader in the home with his kids and his wife, you know, through, you know, managing children, managing you know, hectic kind of work life, and, you know, making it a meaningful life for those children as much as it is about work, you know. And he said he's actually probably learned more life lessons in the home setting that he could then apply then into the kind of sports thing. And I think one of the things that you're kind of seeing a lot more in sports now is because we do some of that stuff too, is okay, once you have the technical skills, right, then be yourself. So it's really interesting, it's like, right, you've done the training, you've got the technical skills, you've made it here, now be yourself, express yourself, right? So it's a bit like, playing the violin, you have to master it before you can kind of start messing around with it, right? So I think those things are really interesting, and that's from a sports guy, right, who's, focused in on professional sports, but, he brings those kind of perspectives in. So I do think that halo beyond your workplace, whilst it doesn't necessarily dictate how successful a leader you'll be, definitely give you those kind of bundles of skills. So you take empathy, which is talked about a lot. I don't think I think I've learned empathy from my grandfather, from a friend, and then you kind of go, well, that felt really good. So how do I bring that in, right? So, I don't think it has to be just the fact that you run a club or you're doing this. There's those little things that. Like I have a friend of mine, and I'll finish now, sorry guys, like I have a friend who's really into art, and pointillism, this kind of artwork, right? And, but it's interesting in that his attention to detail in the workplace because of this art is incredible, Nothing, he's one of these guys, a really safe pair of hands, And it's purely through this work that he's been doing that he's brought this in. Now, nobody said to him to bring it in, blah, blah, but that's just his style, So I think it does help to have that kind of divergent kind of thinking and ideas and hobbies and interactions, whether it's your family or something you're into. You learn a lot, Long answer, but there you go. Hard question.
No, I think it was a very interesting answer. Rugby, I'm a big fan of rugby teams, so I know who Johnny Sexton is.
So you're happy with the change, obviously, yesterday?
But the interesting thing about, for example, rugby is that you've got people all different shapes and sizes, and the view of a high-performing rugby team is the person who's got hold of the ball is the leader. They're all leaders on that, and I think that someone like Sexton is able to sort of command that kind of respect, and that's the point. Is that do you have to respect your leader? Lisa?
I think you definitely do. I think just coming back to the sports analogy, I grew up in America, and I have to say, compared to the English school system, American high school, they really look like you have career counsellors, guidance counsellors, and my guidance counsellor said to me in 11th grade, okay, Lisa, so you're good academically, and I rode horses, you ride horses, that's fine. You need to do a team sport. Because she said, you don't know how to operate in a team particularly. So I basically joined the volleyball team and played volleyball, and that for me was an incredibly positive thing to do, because otherwise I'd have just gone on and not done that. It was like, basically, it's back to that nature-nurture debate. That taught me an awful lot about me, and if you know volleyball, most volleyball players are like this tall. I'm not, 5'6", but there's a spot in that volleyball team for what they call a setter, which is the person who hits the ball second. You don't have to be tall, you have to be agile, you have to think. And so that was what I did. And in every team that we had, and every volleyball team I played in, there was always that leader who wasn't necessarily the best player, but you always respected them. They were the ones who kind of, when the match was going really badly, they kind of pulled everybody together. And so for me, I think respect is probably, one of the most important parts of leadership.
No, I completely agree.
So let's go. What is the most? How do I describe this? Most overrated skill or attribute for a leader. So we still see all these, the various buzzwords, whatever. Which is the one actually you could take it or leave it? Lisa.
I'm not going to say what we were told earlier.
I know. That's why I'm laughing.
Yeah, honestly. Do you know what? It is slightly controversial, but I will go back to what we said earlier. In my mind, the most overrated attribute, particularly in life sciences or in anything, is the technical expertise. I don't care, and normally when you get to the leadership point, it doesn't matter whether you're the best, I'm the best scientist, or I know all about this. It's about how you lead other people to a goal. So I think that, it's I'm not diminishing it at all, But I don't think that that is, you know, you don't have to be an expert to be a
Yeah.
good leader.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think also the grandeur that a lot of people put with leadership, you know, it's and again, I think it's really where they almost, sometimes those who profess to be leaders, it's almost as though they elevate and put themselves on a pedestal. And again, I think it comes around to that ego aspect. And I think that is just completely overrated. The best leaders are really the person in the back room who is making sure that everything is operating at the right level. Everyone is feeling as though they are part of it. It's not the person who is standing there all polished, like saying the right words and taking all the glory. That's the, for me, that's that, you know, I can't stand ego. This is, yeah.
I completely agree. Nothing new.
Yeah.
Right, okay. So, so those of you who are leaders or aspire to be leaders, are hoping that, you know, this is sort of, you know, making you sort of like think actually whether or not, you know, when you look in the mirror, am I that person? Or I'm actually, I'm just sort of thinking about, you know, sort of, you know, you're talking about sort of the teams and not being sort of technical skills, etc. I do these sort of podcasts where I actually interview like leaders who've actually come from non-traditional backgrounds in running life sciences. So Mathieu Flamini, who is the ex-Arsenal footballer, played for France. He's now CEO of a fine chemicals company. He's making fine chemicals from biomass. So it's pretty cool, backed by Sofinova, so, but he's got no technical background. There's Johnny Olson, who's an ex-Saatchi & Saatchi executive. He's now CEO of Touchlight. Brought in a whole bunch of rock star mates to back his company. But they're doing sort of big things. And Jerry Harrison, lead guitarist of Talking Heads, right? Sort of set up a crowd funding thing. None of these guys have got technical skills, but they had a vision. And I think that's interesting. So
and they've probably also got a really strong network that they have built to that point, or they realise where the limitations are of their existing network that they have to then build out around them, because you can't go into that environment without having some strength around you to make decisions from and understanding where that information and insight comes from.
Okay, so I think I've got a minute left, or we've got a minute left, so it's like 15 seconds each. I just like, so, and actually we might have to steal some time, because I've just realised actually it's the elephant in the room that we've been sort of dodging around. Nurture and nature, okay? Is it something that you have, it's innate, or is it actually something that you can train yourself? So for example, if you don't have empathy, if you're absolutely rubbish at listening to other people, that you've got a massive ego, have you got any chance of being a leader unless you're Ronaldo? So,
Look,
Barry, we'll just go all the way down, because I've got Tony hanging. And
sorry, Tony.
Do you have CEO written on your back?
Can't see it from far away.
It does, yes.
We make the answers extra long, just to totally wreck with the timings. Look, I think the nurture versus nature thing, just to bring that in, there's a lot of research done on this. We've kind of looked at it as well ourselves. By and large, it seems to be veering towards the 80-20 rule. So between about 20% to some people say 30% is very much around nature. Okay, so there is some genetic elements of leadership. Okay, but that's only 20%. Right, so there's still 80% there, right? So that's the first thing. So for me, fundamentally, just like any skill or any set of skills, anybody can be a leader. But I think one thing I would say is that it's quite a scary place to be. So leadership by its nature is a doing thing. It's not a thinking thing. You can't think yourself to be a leader. So you have to do it. You have to fall, and you have to kind of recognize that you have to do leadership. Right? It's just not, and that barrier can be the most difficult thing when it comes to kind of moving up to that space. And I've seen very, very senior people who, whilst they're very senior, I think Angie mentioned earlier on, they're not leaders. They're not inspiring. They got there through some political networking or whatever the hell it is. but ultimately they will kind of fall by the wayside in some shape or form, whatever that is. They might stay or whatever. So I think it's the understanding that it's a risky thing. I like to say it's a bit like an actor. You know, they put themselves out onto the stage, to put their heart and soul out there. Sometimes it's going to work, sometimes it's not going to work. And you know, I do think that's why, you know, people talk a lot about resilience these days. You know, I think the resilience thing of picking yourself up, is this something I really want to be? You know, and it's not for everybody, you know. So there are roles for everybody. You mentioned the rugby team, so sorry to bring it back in. You know, you're going to have a scrum half, you know, going to do a line out, right? But there's a role for that scrum half. There's a role for somebody, and you mentioned there's a great example actually, the volleyball team. You know, but you putting yourself out there for me is the big thing. Being resilient enough to do that. So definitely for me, it's 80-90% nurture.
I'm definitely on the nurture side, and I think it's almost a shame that we're having this debate, because it makes sort of, you know, young people growing up think, oh, maybe I'm not a natural leader. Everybody can be taught, I think, as long as they aren't this big ego, hey, I've got it already, no one needs to teach me. But as long as, you know, you're sort of going, do you know what, this is a skill you can learn, you know. I'm a great believer in like executive coaching and things like that, and you know, those sorts of things you have to want to continue to learn, but we can all learn to be leaders. As I said, I think the only nurture part of it is those people who really shouldn't do it. Other than that, everybody can learn. You can be an introvert, you can be an extrovert, doesn't matter. People are out there who can teach you and give you those skills that you need to lead an organisation.
Yeah, we all know who they are.
I agree. I think because I seeing Tony's, I was really intrigued on what the figures were for your poll, because the thing is, it is where I was thinking, it's a mixture of the two. There are natural attributes that you have as a leader, but the thing is, what you do learn is to enhance them, develop more, and you sharpen and you develop into a leader. It's really where, you know, the theoretical, yes, you can read it, but the thing is, you lead by your actions. It's not what you say, it's really what you do.
Exactly the same. Vast majority nurture. I think you just kind of have a natural instinct to want to learn, and you've got to have a natural instinct to put yourself into the uncomfortable and be comfortable in the uncomfortable to want to learn. And then that comes a little bit from the nature, but when you're there, everything then has to be picked up. I never thought I'd be sitting here when I was a scientist in a lab in GSK 20 years ago, and here we are doing this, so who knows what's next.
Yeah, so I guess that's the 20% thing. So before I hand back over to our great leader, I'd like you to show your appreciation. I'd like to show your appreciation to our panel.